We're now going to remind you how to find the highest common factor or the lowest common multiple of two numbers. So in part A, we're asked to find the highest common factor of 240 and 180. In other words, we want to get the largest number that goes exactly into both. And in order to do that, we're going to divide both numbers by prime factors. So we're going to get all the prime factors of each number to begin with. So let's start with 240. So divide by the first prime number, which is 2, and that's going to give us 120. So that's still an even number, so we can divide by 2 again. That's going to give us 60. Still an even number, so we divide by 2 once again, and that's going to give us 30. Still even, so we divide again by 2. And that's going to give us 15. So we're no longer even. What we're left with is odd. So we now move on to the next prime number, which is 3. Don't move to 5. It's very tempting to move to 5, but check does 3 work. 3 goes into 15. So we can divide by 3. And that's going to give us 5. And then now and only now can we move from 3 to 5. 3 no longer goes into 5, so go to the next prime, which is 5, and then divide by 5, and that's just going to give us 1. Okay, we're going to do exactly the same with 180. We're going to get all the prime factors that multiply to give it. So again, start with 2. 180 is even, so we can divide by an even number, 2. That's going to give us 90, which is still even, so we can divide by 2 again. And that's going to give us 45. So 45 is no longer even, so move to the next prime, which is 3. Again, don't just think it's 5, it might be 3. Add 4 and 5 together, you get 9. 9's a multiple of 3, so 3 goes into it. So then divide by 3. So 3 goes into 4 once, and 1 over 3 goes into 15 5 times. Again, we can still divide by 3. And that's going to leave us with 5. And now we move to the next prime, which is 5. So divide by 5, and that's going to leave us with 1. Now, what we're going to do is write out each number as a product of its primes. So let's start with 240. We're going to put it up top because it was the first number, and then we're going to put 180 underneath. So let's start with the 2's in each number. So in 240 we have 1, 2, 3, 4 2's being multiplied. 1, 2, 3 and 4. And then in 180 we've only 2 2's being multiplied. So in the first 2 in 180 goes directly under the 2 in 240, and then the next 2 in 180 goes directly under the 2 in 240. So that's all the 2's sorted. So let's go back to 240. There's only 1 3 in 240, and there's 2 3's in 180. So after this 2, we're going to write down multiplied by 3. Now, the 2 3's that multiply to give 180, we can't write them under the 2's. Okay, you can't have different numbers one above the other. They're either exactly the same or there's just one number in a gap. You can't have different numbers one above the other. So we have to leave gaps and then line up the 3's. So there's the first 3 that multiplies in 180, and then put the next one after it. So there's going to have to be a gap up here, okay, for 240, because there is only 1 3 that multiplies to give 240. And then there's 1 5 that multiplies to give 240, so we'll put that at the end. And likewise, there's only a single 5 that multiplies to give 180, so we'll line it up underneath, like that. So really important that all the 2's are lined up, all the 3's are lined up, and all the 5's are lined up. And if you have to leave gaps, make sure you do so. Again, I stress this, you can never have 2 numbers one above the other such that they're different. They're either exactly the same, like that, or like that, or like that, or it's just one number and a gap. One number and a gap. Okay, so we want to get the highest common factor, the HCF. In order to do that, what you do is you go to all the factors in the bottom number that have an identical factor above them, and you circle those factors. So let's scan along the bottom number. There's a 2. Does it have an identical factor above it? Yes, it does. Circle it. There's a 2. Does it have an identical factor above it? Yes, so circle that one. There's a 3. Does it have an identical factor above it? Yes, it does, so circle that one. There's a 3. Does it have an identical factor above it? No, so don't circle that one. And then there's a 5. Does it have an identical factor above it? Yes, so circle it as well. So you only circle all the factors in the bottom number that have an identical factor above them. We then multiply those factors together. So 2 multiplied by 2, multiplied by 3, multiplied by 5. So 2 2s are 4, 4 3s are 12, 12 5s are 60. So our final answer is 60. 60 is the highest common factor of 240 and 180. It's the largest number that goes into both. Okay, let's look at part B. Part B, this time we want to get the lowest common multiple of 180 and 140. That means we're looking for the smallest number that 180 and 140 go into. So to start with, the method is the same. We're going to divide each number by prime numbers to get all the prime factors that multiply to give those numbers. So let's start with 180. I know we've done it in part A, but we'll repeat. So let's take 180, divide by primes. So divide by 2, we get 90. Can still be divided by 2. That will give us 45. And then we divide by 3. And that will give us 15. Divide by 3 again. And that will give us 5. And then finally we divide by 5. And that is going to give us 1. So those are all the prime factors that multiply to give 180. Let's do the same now for 140. So 140 is even, so we can divide by 2, and that's going to give us 70. 70 is even, so we can divide by 2 again. And that's going to give us 35. Now 35 is no longer even, so you go to the next prime, which is 3. 5 plus 3 is 8. 8 is not a multiple of 3, so you can't divide by 3. So we then move to 5 and divide by 5. 35 divided by 5 will give us 7. We can't divide by 5 anymore, so we now move up to the next prime, which is 7. And we divide by 7. And that's going to leave us with 1. So we've now got all the prime factors that multiply to give 140. So just like the last example, we're going to write 180 and 140 as a product of their primes, making sure we line up identical factors in each number. So we'll put 180 at the top, and then we'll put 140 underneath. So let's start with the 2's. There's only 2 2's that multiply to give 180. And likewise, there's only 2 2's that multiply to give 140. So make sure they're lined up. Now, there are 2 3's that multiply to give 180. So we'll put those down after the 2. Now, you'll note that there are no 3's that multiply to give 140, so we need to leave 2 gaps here. You'll then note that there's 1 5 that multiplies to give 180. And you'll also note that there's 1 5 that multiplies to give 140, so we'll have to line those up. And then you'll notice that in 140 there's a 7, so we'll put that 7 out by itself because there's no 7 that multiplies to give 180. Okay, now this time we want to get the lowest common multiple, the smallest number that 140 and 180 go into. So this time what we do is we circle all the factors in the bottom number. So we circle every single one of them, all of them. And then you go to the top number and you only circle factors in the top number that don't have an identical number underneath them. So you don't circle these 2's because they have an identical factor underneath, so they've already been used. You don't circle this 5 because it's already got an identical factor underneath, but you do circle these two 3's because they do not have identical factors underneath them. Okay, so we've got all the factors that we need to circle to get the LCM. So the LCM is 2 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 5 multiplied by 7 and then multiplied by these two 3's. Now again, the smart way of doing this is to remember that 2 by 2 by 5 by 7 is 140, and then 3 by 3 is just 9, so we're multiplying 140 by 9, so we can go to our calculator, and then 140 multiplied by 9 is going to give us 1260. And that's how you find the lowest common multiple of two numbers. So make sure you can distinguish the difference. To get the highest common factor, you only circle the factors in the bottom number that have an identical factor above them. But when you're getting the lowest common multiple, you circle all the factors in the bottom number, but you only circle extra factors in the top number. In other words, factors that don't have identical ones underneath.